Hello Sterling, Colorado, and all you YouTubers out there. This is Michelle Me back with you in the Nostalgic Ceramics Studio. And today we are going to be making a planter. Just in time for spring, just in time for May flowers, we're gonna make a planter. Now these planters aren't gonna be huge. They're gonna be, an average size planter. We're going to be hand building them. And I want to go ahead and get into small beginner sculptural design elements that are going to be placed on this. So if you're able to come to the workshop in person, this is an exciting event because this is the workshop where we're going to begin to start doing sculptural type stuff. One individual has already put mushrooms on her planter. I'm turning mine into a fairy garden. So I'm gonna go ahead and start that process on film for you. Unfortunately, I don't think that I'll have time to finish the planter on film for you, but I will show it at the end when it is done. Also, in the workshop, if you come and you're local and you're from Sterling and you come and join in, we will be giving you a little bit of extra time if you need it. So you're not going to want to miss this one. It is a little bit more pricey in terms of cost for the workshop. However, we are going to be building a pretty good sized piece and we are going to be learning sculptural techniques. And these pots are going to take up a little bit more room in the kiln. So don't let the price deter you. This is not one you're going to want to miss. Let's go ahead and jump right into it. Okay, so let's go ahead and start by going over some of the tools that we're going to be using, some of the basic tools that we're going to be using to do this build. Obviously, if you are a potter at home and you have other tools you can use, you can bring those in if you like to use different tools than what I have here. But these are just the basic tools. I generally tend to use some other tools sometimes as well. However, I don't want you to feel like you have to have these expensive tools to do a build like this. Very basics is all you need. Generally speaking, that is true for most things we build with clay, or at least hand build with clay. Generally speaking, we don't need a lot of tools. Even on the wheel, you don't need a lot of tools. So use what you can find around the house. And I'm just gonna go over real quickly with you what I will be using today. I've got this GR pottery form. It's a 10-inch round, and that's what I'm going to be using to trace out the base of my planter. And then I have this square, which is what I'm going to be using to cut out the walls of my planter. In the workshop, I'll have these pieces already cut out for you, and that's on Friday the 10th you can come at noon in the afternoon, or you can come at 7 p.m. So I've got 2 different time slots for this workshop on Friday the 10th. I'm gonna be using this roller because I've really been liking it, the trees and the little birds, and I'm turning my planter into a little gnome house. So I thought that this was very fitting and would fit in with that really well. We've got water and a sponge. I have this Xiam tools. It is a tool that you can use to cut a perfect seam edge. You don't have to use that. You could just use your fettling knife and do this, which is generally what I typically end up doing anyway. But this is a nice tool to have in the studio. I've got my potter's thumb. I've got a score tool. I've got the yellow rib from Mud Tools. I have this stylus tool. It's got a rubber end and it's got two different end shapes. I have another stylus tool that is kind of, I don't know, thinner and pointier. And then I've got my slip. So this is what we're going to be starting with. Let me move all of this stuff out of the way and I will go ahead and get started. Okay, so I have a pretty large slab of clay that I'm working with here today. And that is because I may have to cut out 2 pieces for the wall and then a piece for the base. So I needed kind of a fairly large piece of clay. And I'm gonna just go ahead and start by ribbing out that texture from the slab roller. This serves two purposes. Not only does it take away the texture, but it also compresses the clay, which helps prevent cracking. And also helps you see or bring to the surface any air bubbles that need to be popped. And so it's real important not to skip this step. I know it seems like it's kind of one of those things where, is that really necessary? Especially if you like that canvas texture. You know, and some people do leave the canvas texture in and they don't compress and they don't eliminate the texture. However, I highly encourage it because you will have more success having your pot keep its form. It'll warp less. It will also crack less. And nothing can be more frustrating than having a big giant piece that you've been working on for a while and have it crack at the very end, or warp on you so badly that you're not really able to use it. It's not functional. So yeah, always compress and rib your slabs. And we go ahead and in the studio here, we do that on both sides. This is a monster slab, as you can see. This mark here is where I put two pieces of clay together. And so we need to make sure that we get that compressed and back together. This pressure that I'm giving is fairly firm. It's not so firm that I'm like stretching the clay or you know, causing it to tear or anything. It's just firm enough to really compress, get that texture out. I do it on both sides in every direction. And this is a really important step that it's good not to skip. I keep reiterating that because some of the students sometimes I think forget this part of the process, and it's really an essential piece to helping you be as successful as you want to be with your build. So I'm going to go ahead and just lift that up off of the table on both sides. I don't want it stuck to the table. Okay. And now I'm just going to go ahead and roll in my texture. And I'm rolling it this way, I think. No, I'm rolling it this way. And I'm gonna do it all the way across here because when I cut my pieces out for my walls for my planter, I want the texture to be going up and down this way. So actually I'm gonna start over here at the end and then work my way in the other direction. And I'm just overlapping that ever so slightly. I'm giving enough pressure for a print, but not so much pressure that I'm tearing the clay. I do not use the handles on these rollers. I use my hands to get an even, firm pressure as I roll. That way I get the best impression possible from my roller. Not all rollers are created equal, so when you're purchasing texture rollers, look to see how deep the design is into the wood, because the deeper the design, the better success you'll have with that texture roller. Okay, I'm happy with that. So I'm gonna go ahead and lift this up off of the table again. Trying not to stretch the clay too much. This clay is very, very damp, and it really wants to stick and tear, as you just saw. Okay. Okay, so from here, I'm gonna go ahead and take my form. This is a GR pottery form, and I'm using the large side here to kind of figure out where I'm going to cut out my base from. And I'm thinking over here because that gives me all this space here to make my walls. So the texture was not as great over here, but I'm okay with that because this is gonna end up being the bottom of the pot anyway. How many times is somebody actually gonna flip this over and look at the detailed texture on the bottom of the pot? Probably no one. I mean, you know, if you're doing something like this to sell to the public on a mass scale, I mean, that might be an attention to detail thing that you would want to maybe rectify. But even then, I think that this is good enough. So I'm going to just go with it. It's a good idea to keep any moist clay in a bag because we'll use this later for our sculpting pieces that we're gonna need. So I'm just gonna go ahead and lift this up and kind of set it to the side here. That did stretch a little, so I might come back and cut that back into the round again later. The next step is cutting out the walls. And I know that I want these walls to be 7 inches high. So on this square, it would be from here to here. And so I'm just gonna start cutting, and I'm gonna do it down low so I can cut 2 pieces just in case I don't have enough to go all the way around. I have another slab I can attach. So how I do this is I just go ahead and set the square on the slab. You know, I measure a little bit above that 7 inch mark. I go in one direction, I go in the other direction. If you've ever been a quilter, this is quite similar to using the square for quilting. Then I just kind of a few inches, or 3 inches to be exact, line it up over here on that mark, and then just kind of keep going. I want it to stay pretty square, so you know, you want to leave a little bit of space to line up and make sure that that square is on there as square as possible. Okay, and then I've got myself an extra piece here I'm going to put in the plastic. Okay, so, and then on this side, I'm going to go ahead and cut that square as well. Again, I've got extra piece for the plastic. It's really important to keep any clay that you're going to still be using moist. Okay, so what I did here is I flipped it over so that I can count this way. So here's the 1 mark. The 1 mark was this way, now it's this way. That way I can put this square on the 7 line here, on the 7 inch mark. line the square up so everything is actually in fact square. And then I'm going to start cutting this slab square here as well. Now this time we can line the square up on the line below, and that will give us a very square cut as well. You know, make sure we're square here and here. And then that way we know that that slab there is square. Now, obviously, when I lift this, it can get warped. So you're gonna want to make sure that your slab is kind of ready to stand up and is dry enough to hold its own weight, because you're not gonna wanna move this around too much. You're gonna kind of wanna stand it up and be done with it, right? So we're gonna do that again. I'm gonna line this up on the 7 line here. And I'm gonna cut that square again. Okay. Lining it up at this top line. Kind of cut them together, kind of helps you keep it square. In the workshop, I will have paper forms for you, so you won't have to do all this work. It will be done for you. And then square that off. And then these are all of my extra pieces that I'm putting in here. And there we have it. We have all of the pieces that we need to start building our planter. So I am going to go ahead and lift this up and just see if it is supporting itself. Which, no, not really. It's not supporting itself yet. So I'm going to need to let these slabs dry out just ever so slightly, and then I will come back and we'll do the build. One thing you can do if you want these slabs to dry out a little bit quicker is to go ahead and put them on, put a fan on them or a heater, space heater, and that can speed it up a little bit. Although a tale of caution on that is that the quicker you dry your clay, the more likely it is to crack. So I'll just be patient and I'll be back here once this is ready. Okay, so we are back, and I think my slabs are gonna be self-supporting now, so that's good. The only thing I did off camera was I did go ahead and put the GR pottery form back on here and make that round again. And then I also placed it on a bat so that I can lift this up once I've built it. So for starters, we are going to need to use one of these tools. The benefit of this tool is that you can get a perfect 45-degree angle cut with it for your seam lineup. The disadvantage of it is that you have to cut one side, flip your slab over to cut the other side, and that can warp your slab. So most of the time, I prefer just to cut an angle, come over here and cut another angle. It's one of those things where it depends on what's more important to you, that your slab doesn't warp or that you have a 45-degree angle. So, and that is kind of dependent on the project. For me personally, I'm more concerned about these slabs warping real bad because I want it to be pretty level and flush. I want it to look very put together. So I'm just gonna go ahead and use the fettling knife to cut my angle. And so again, it's whatever angle you cut on one side, you then hold and cut that same angle on the other side. And you get better with that, with practice as well. You can get it to where good enough to where your seams don't really show anyway with some practice. So I generally speaking just tend to do this number here. We may need to line these slabs up with one another. We'll see. I may need to cut more or less, or I may need to cut more off of one of these. We'll get one on and then go from there. Actually, I'm wrong. I'm gonna go ahead and put these together and then put it up and then determine where I'm gonna cut it. So, I'm gonna lift this up, line this slab up over here. I've got my slip and my score tool. I'm gonna go ahead and slip and score that all at the same time here. I'm gonna do that on this side as well. Okay. I'm gonna clean that up because I don't want it to stick to the table. And I'm gonna go ahead and kind of put that together. And I'm just kind of pinching gently, making sure that that seam has made good contact with the other slab. And as you can see, really, you can barely even see that seam line there. So from here, I kind of know for a fact that I don't need this much length. I'm gonna kind of do a quick measurement to just kind of see. I'm gonna start here and just do kind of a quick measurement to kind of see how much I do actually need. Okay, so according to this, I can stop at about here. I'm just gonna give myself a little bit extra and just cut this excess off right here, because I don't want to try and lift more than is necessary. I'm gonna go ahead and put my extra in the bag to keep wet. And from here, we're gonna kind of flip this over. I'm going to take my thumb tool and close off this seam so it doesn't come apart. I'm going to cut that little bit off right there. This is an advanced beginner into intermediate project. People that have come to several of my workshops already will probably do just fine with this project. If you have not done one of these workshops yet and you've never worked with clay before, you may want to start with a different project to begin with. I think you might be less frustrated. However, if you want to give it a try, you know, I say go for it. So it's up to you. Just keep in mind that if you've never worked with clay before, this is a little bit of a challenge. right, so now I can't remember what side is the top and what side is the bottom. Okay, so when I flip this up, I'm gonna flip it up this way, and we're just gonna kind of hope that it holds its form here. I'm gonna check, make sure I'm in frame, so make sure you all can see what I'm doing here. I am kind of making it a circle. The beauty about a circle is that circles do tend to hold their form fairly easily. So let me come and look at what you guys see. Okay, that's just perfect. I'm gonna put this right here. Now I can see from looking at the top of this that I've got way too much clay for this. So the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna set this on here, and I'm going to cut off any excess that I don't need. So I'm gonna kind of roll that up on itself so it's easier to lift up. Scoot this over and frame a little more. Right, so did you see what I did? I made this, I kind of coiled this in on itself, made it smaller so that I can just lift it up. I'm gonna line up the back edge here. And then I'm gonna start to unroll this. And I'm gonna line it up on my base slab. I got one side lined up there. I'll line up this other side. Okay. And that's going to give me where I need to cut off the excess. Okay. This is a pretty large hand-built piece. So it is one of those things that is a skill level up from, hand building a mug. So just keep that in mind. So from here, I have the basic size that I need. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hold my fettling knife on an angle like this, at an angle, and I'm going to cut down through both pieces at that angle. And what that's going to do is give me an exact lineup of where this gets scored together. I'm actually going to cut that again while it's facing me because I did not cut that very good when I kind of was cutting backwards from what I could see. So I'm going to line this up. You want it to look the way that you want it to look when it's completed. And we are going to cut that again, but just more straight. All right, so then I'm gonna go ahead and slip and score this together at the seam. Again, we slip and score both sides of that seam. So it's just like building the mug. We put that seam together, overlapping just slightly, and we pinch and roll it up. We pinch and roll it up. Get that seam put together. Okay. At this point, you can go ahead and close off the seam on the inside. I do that using my thumb tool typically. Make that seam disappear. Make sure this outside is put together nicely. Okay, now from here, we want to go ahead and start compressing this rim with a little bit of water and our fingers. And all I'm doing is using a little bit of water and pinching. This step is important so that your rim doesn't start to crack. I don't know if any of you who did the mug workshop had experienced any cracking around the rim. This is an important step to do as soon as you can, because this area is most prone to cracking right away. So I'm just smoothing out that rim, pinching, slightly compressing those corners in. Added a little bit of water, and that's going to keep that rim the way you want it. This piece here, if it sticks up and is a bump and you don't like it at the seam, you can just go ahead and cut that off. Some people leave it. It's the sign of a hand-built piece. If you want to keep it on there, that's fine. You're the artist, right? I typically cut it off. I don't know. I typically like the top portions of these slabs when they get put together. I typically like them to be very clean looking. Okay, so we still have not attached the base, right? And this is basically just like the hand building mug workshop. We're gonna have to flip this whole thing over so that we can attach the base. And actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I think that there's gonna be an easier way to do that. So in the workshop, what I'm actually probably gonna have everyone do is slip and score both sides of this before we roll it up and place it on there. That way we're not having to do this process here of flipping everything over, since this is not a very easy thing to do. Case in point, I'm not gonna edit that out. Like, this is reality, right? This is the reality of hand building. I'm just going to kind of slap this down a little to kind of create a memory of it being flat again, since I clearly warped it. And then I'm gonna go ahead, slip and score the bottom. Again, in the workshop, we're gonna be doing this differently because that clearly was not easy. I think that if we had slipped and scored to begin with, that would have been a much better thing to do. So I'm gonna go ahead and slip and score both sides of this. I'm gonna lay this on top, and then I'm gonna flip that over again. Okay, so now I'm just gonna put this wall back where it's supposed to be on the base here. Line everything up. Okay. All right, and then just like the mug workshop, we are going to tamp this down just ever so slightly. But instead of picking the whole piece up and tamping, we're just gonna kind of tamp the whole board lightly. Kind of get that base seated on real well. Get the walls seated on the base real well. Okay. And then from here, we're gonna go ahead and do a coil. These coils don't have to be massive. As a matter of fact, sometimes I think the smaller they are, the easier they are to make them the easier it is to make them disappear. Depending on what kind of piece you're making, will determine the size the coil needs to be. This project here, since there's not going to be a whole lot of pressure on that seam, since the walls are basically sitting on the base, this coil does not have to be big. It just has to be enough to prevent the walls from splitting apart during drying, splitting apart from the base. I'm gonna go ahead and just sponge that a little. It's getting dry. Okay. And I'm pretty happy with the size of this coil. So I'm gonna slip and score. I am supporting the outside as I'm pushing on the wall. I'm scoring on both the inside of the base and the wall. I'm gonna go ahead and score my coil here. Sorry if I'm out of frame. I'm going to grab a paintbrush here just to put a little bit of extra slip in there. Put a little bit of extra slip on my coil. And we're going to go ahead and drop that in. Let me go check and make sure that you can see what I'm doing here. Hang on, I'll be right back. I'm going to move this a little bit closer so you can see a little better there. Just placing this coil right there where I slipped and scored it. Right at the corner where the seam is. And I'm going to pinch it off right there. Okay. All right, so from here, I'm going to just pinch that coil into that corner seam. I'm going to support the wall on the outside here because I don't want to push the outside wall off the base. So what I'm doing is I'm just kind of pushing this down and in. And I actually typically do it along the side like this. I'm pushing on the outside and the inside at the same time. Okay, and then from here I just kind of start smoothing it, and again I'm supporting the outside as I do this. I start smoothing it down the middle first. Get rid of all those marks I left as I was compressing that coil in. And then from there, I start smoothing the coil up the wall. And you can start smoothing it onto the base as well. Okay. And smoothing up the wall. I am supporting on the outside the whole time I'm doing this, so I don't push anything out on the outside. I'm just moving the clay on the inside. All right, and then from there you can just kind of take your finger and clean that up. Clean it up on the wall, clean it up on the base, make that coil disappear. You don't want to see that coil. Inevitably, this is a cracking point. So the more you can press this coil in, and the more you make it disappear, the less likely you are to get cracking around the base here. Okay, so really when it's all said and done, your goal on this coil is for it to blend so seamlessly that there's no seam. It completely disappears. You can't tell that it was coiled. That would be the goal. Just kind of, my clay is kind of bowing in, and so I'm just kind of pushing it out in the areas where it has bowed. At this point, you have a planter, you could be done. Right? So here we are. We're just like, that's a very basic pot, a very basic planter. At this point, you could be done. And just like before, I like to use my banding wheel to kind of make a foot. So I'm gonna do that part next. You do not have to have a banding wheel to do this part. It does make it easier, but it is not necessary. You don't have to have a banding wheel to compress the base and make a foot. You would just turn your pot and, you know, go and turn without the banding wheel. Okay, and many of you may already know I like to use this tool to do a little undercut because I think that looks nice. Most of my hand build projects that are a cylindrical shape like this have this undercut and this design detail at the foot. Because I think that's important to give it kind of a finished appearance. Okay. Just kind of pushing that base in a little in spots that kind of got smooshed. I think when I flipped it over, I'm pushing out and pushing in the places where it needs to be put together better. Okay, and now you can see now that I pushed that in, my coil reappeared, so I'm gonna just go in and compress that again. Okay. All right, so there's that. All right, so like I said, I'm turning mine into a gnome house, so this gets to be the fun part where I get to decide what the next design features are. And I want to give mine a belly. I want it to be bulbous. I'm going to use the yellow rib to do that. I'm holding it in my hand like this. I'm going to do this motion and support with my other hand. And I'm going to begin to bulb this pot out. This is going to give it kind of a bellied effect. And it's also going to make it so it holds more soil. It increases the volume of the pot. Again, this is something that does not have to be done. If you don't feel comfortable, this is a little bit of an intermediate technique on hand builds. As you're doing this, make sure that you're not only looking on the inside of the pot, that you're also looking on the outside of the form. I really want this to be quite wide at the bottom and narrow at the top because I want it to look very whimsical. Because that's what I'm going for. I'm kind of going for this whimsical fairy garden pot. What I'm doing here is just kind of eyeing from the inside and the outside center. If your eyeball says that it's centered, then everybody else's eyeball says it's centered too. So what I'm doing is just kind of making sure that I'm in the round, that it looks round to me, both on the inside and the outside as I go. Okay. You know, I'm pretty happy with that, but I'm going to keep going because I like to push the limits on things. So why not this? What I mean by pushing the limits is there is a point where your clay will no longer stretch and it will just start to crack and break. So anytime you're doing, and that's true on the pottery wheel or hand building, there does come a point where you can't stretch the clay any further. It will bust apart. Or get too thin, or both. I do like to push those limits. So I do push those limits. Because I like to get really great forms. I don't know if you can see this or not. See if I can show you. Right here, we're starting to crack. It's starting to bust apart at the seam. I'm going to compress that back in and keep going. Okay. All right, I'm pretty happy with that. I'm going to just refine this top edge a little right there. I think I've pushed the limits as far as they will go, and I am on the brink of busting this pot open, so I'm going to stop there. Again, I'm just eyeballing round. If it looks round to your eye, it will look round to the eyes of others, generally speaking. Okay, and that's it. This is the planter. I'm not going to film all of the embellishments that I'm going to put on. However, I will demonstrate those in the workshop. So if you want to see the embellishments that I put on this demonstrated, you're gonna have to come and join me on Friday at 12 noon or on Friday the 10th at 6 o'clock p.m. You can sign up for this workshop online at www.nostalgicceramics.com. And there we are, our planter. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please go ahead and take a moment to hit the like and the subscribe button, and I will continue to make more videos for you. If you click on that bell, you will get notified anytime a new video gets posted. And thank you for watching.